There's a force operating inside you right now. You can feel it in the moments when you say exactly what you shouldn't, when your plans collapse at the worst possible time, when you laugh at things you know aren't funny, when something in you undermines everything you're trying to build. Carl Jung called this the trickster. And understanding what it actually is, what it wants, why it operates the way it does, will either save you from years of self-sabotage or drive you deeper into patterns you can't escape. The trickster isn't the fool. The fool is innocent, naive, walking through life unaware of danger. But the trickster knows exactly where the cliff is, and pushes you toward it anyway, not to destroy you, but because something about your current position, your current understanding, your current identity, needs to shatter. And the trickster is the psychic mechanism that does the shattering. Jung documented this force across every culture he studied. It appears in mythology, folklore, religion, art, always at boundaries, always at thresholds, always in the space between what's acceptable and what's forbidden, between order and chaos, between the sacred and the profane. The trickster lives in that liminal space, and from there it reaches into your carefully constructed life and introduces exactly the chaos you've been trying to avoid. You've experienced this. You're in an important meeting and suddenly you can't stop thinking about something completely inappropriate. You're trying to make a good impression and you say, the one thing guaranteed to ruin it. You've planned everything perfectly, and at the crucial moment you forget, you stumble, you fail in ways that seem almost intentional. This isn't random. It's the trickster, operating from your unconscious, undermining your conscious intentions. And Jung discovered that this undermining serves a function you don't recognize until years later. The trickster appears in mythology as Hermes, Loki, Coyote, Anansi the spider, Prometheus. These aren't just stories. They're psychological patterns that exist in the collective unconscious. Universal structures that manifest in every culture because they represent something fundamental about how the psyche operates, and what they reveal is disturbing. The same force that creates also destroys. The same energy that brings fire to humanity gets punished by the gods. The same figure that helps heroes also betrays them. Hermes is the Greek trickster, god of thieves and merchants, messenger between gods and humans, guide of souls to the underworld. He exists at every boundary, never fully in one realm or another, always crossing, always mediating, always transgressing. He steals Apollo's cattle on the day he's born, not because he needs them, but because stealing is his nature. Crossing boundaries is his function, and Apollo, the god of order and reason, can't contain him. Jung recognized that Hermes represents something the conscious mind can't control. The trickster operates from the unconscious, from the place where your intentions don't reach, where your willpower has no jurisdiction, and from that place, it introduces chaos into your ordered life. Not meaningless chaos, but chaos that serves a function you won't understand until the destruction is complete. Loki is the Norse trickster. He causes the death of Baldur, the most beloved of all gods. Through trickery and manipulation, he sets in motion events that lead to Ragnarok, the death of the gods themselves, the end of the cosmic order. And Jung observed something crucial about this myth. When the trickster is bound, when its energy is suppressed, it doesn't disappear. It accumulates. And eventually it destroys everything. This is what happens in your psyche. You have parts of yourself you can't accept, impulses you suppress, desires you deny, aspects of your nature that contradict the image you're trying to maintain. And all of this rejected content doesn't vanish. It goes into the shadow. And the trickster, Jung discovered, is deeply connected to the shadow. It's the mechanism through which shadow content erupts into consciousness, through slips of the tongue, through self-sabotage, through patterns of behavior You don't consciously choose but can't seem to stop. You're trying to be perfect, maintain a flawless persona, present yourself as completely together, competent, appropriate, and the trickster waits, watches. And at the moment when perfection is most important, it introduces exactly the imperfection that shatters your image. You trip, you forget, you say something revealing, and everyone sees what you've been hiding, not because you're weak, but because the trickster doesn't allow false perfection to sustain indefinitely. Jung called this compensation. The psyche seeks balance. When you push too far in one direction, unconscious forces push back. When you're too serious, the trickster makes you laugh at inappropriate moments. When you're too rigid, it makes you spontaneous in ways you can't control. When you're too ordered, it introduces chaos. This isn't punishment, it's the psyche protecting itself from one-sidedness. From the dangers of extreme identification with any single position. But the trickster does more than balance. It transforms. And this is where Jung's understanding becomes crucial. The trickster appears in myths as both creator and destroyer. Prometheus brings fire to humanity. Hermes brings music and communication. Anansi brings stories. But they also steal, deceive, manipulate. They're moral in Jung's terms, not immoral, but amoral. They operate outside the framework of social values, outside the structure of ego consciousness. And from that outside position, they reshape reality itself. You experience this in moments of genuine creativity. When you're trying to create something and your conscious intentions keep failing. You have a plan, a vision, clear understanding of what you want to produce. And nothing works. The work feels dead, mechanical. Then you stop trying, stop controlling, and something emerges that you didn't plan, didn't intend, couldn't have produced through conscious effort. This is trickster energy, creating through chaos rather than through order. Jung observed that the trickster is closely connected to what he called the play instinct. Not play in the childish sense, but play in the deepest psychological sense. The capacity to engage with reality without rigid attachment to outcomes, to experiment without fear of failure, to improvise rather than follow predetermined scripts. Most people lose this capacity. They become too serious, too invested in maintaining their persona, too afraid of making mistakes. And when play disappears, something in the psyche begins to die. The trickster restores play by making you fail, by undermining your seriousness, by introducing mistakes you can't avoid. And these failures, these moments of chaos, they crack open the rigid structures that were suffocating your spontaneity. You're forced to improvise, to respond in the moment rather than follow your script, to acknowledge that you're not in complete control. And this acknowledgement, Jung discovered, is essential for psychological development, because consciousness develops through disruption. When everything goes according to plan, consciousness doesn't expand. You stay within familiar patterns, comfortable routines, predictable outcomes. But when the trickster introduces chaos, when your plans collapse and your persona cracks, you're forced into new territory, forced to encounter aspects of yourself you didn't know existed, forced to develop capacities you didn't know you needed. This is why the trickster appears in initiation rituals across cultures. The person being initiated undergoes symbolic death. Their old identity is destroyed. They're taken to the threshold between what they were and what they're becoming. And at that threshold, trickster energy operates, destroying the old, creating space for the new, but never guaranteeing what the new will be. The transformation isn't controlled, it's chaotic, dangerous, and absolutely necessary. Jung documented that the trickster represents a stage of consciousness that precedes the development of stable ego. In mythology, the trickster is often described as having the mentality of a child, driven entirely by appetites, cruel without meaning to be cruel, helpful without intending to help, acting from pure impulse without consideration of consequences. This isn't noble, savage romanticism. It's recognition of a psychological stage that exists in everyone's development. You were this before you developed social awareness, before you learned to control your impulses, before you constructed a persona that made you acceptable to others. You operated from pure trickster energy, doing whatever you wanted, saying whatever came to mind, acting on immediate desire without thought of how others perceived you. Then socialization happened. You learned to suppress these impulses, to control yourself, to present an acceptable face to the world. But the trickster energy didn't disappear. It went into the unconscious. And from there it continues to operate. Every time you do something you immediately regret. Every time you undermine your own goals. Every time you laugh at exactly the wrong moment. That's the trickster. The unsocialized part of you that never learned to follow rules. That doesn't care about your persona. That operates from pure impulse regardless of consequences. And Jung observed that this creates a conflict most people never resolve. The conscious ego wants control, order, predictability, success according to social standards. But the trickster wants disruption, play, boundary crossing, freedom from social constraints. And these forces war within you constantly. The ego trying to maintain its image, the trickster trying to shatter that image. And most of your internal struggle, Jung discovered, comes from this conflict between conscious control and unconscious chaos. The danger isn't the trickster itself. The danger is unconsciousness of the trickster. When you don't recognize this force operating in you, when you believe you're in complete conscious control of your behavior, the trickster acts autonomously. It sabotages you in ways you don't understand, undermines you without your knowledge, and you're left confused about why you keep failing in the same ways, why you keep making the same mistakes, why patterns repeat despite your conscious intentions to change them. But when you become conscious of the trickster, when you recognize this force as a legitimate part of your psyche, something shifts. You're no longer at war with your own chaos. You're no longer trying to suppress impulses that can't be permanently suppressed. Instead, you develop what Jung would call conscious relationship to the trickster. You recognize when it's operating. You understand what it wants. And you can work with it rather than against it. This doesn't mean surrendering to chaos. It means recognizing that chaos serves a function, that disruption creates possibility, that the moments when your plans fail might be moments when something better can emerge, that the parts of yourself you've been trying to eliminate might contain energy you actually need, that the trickster isn't your enemy. It's an aspect of your psyche that's been trying to get your attention through the only means available to it. Disruption. Jung connected the trickster to the alchemical figure of Mercurius, Mercury in Roman mythology. In alchemy, Mercurius is the most paradoxical substance, simultaneously matter and spirit, masculine and feminine, fixed and volatile, poisonous and healing. It's the substance that can't be grasped. The moment you think you've captured it, it slips away, changes form, becomes something else entirely. Alchemists spent lifetimes trying to work with Mercurius, to stabilize it, to use its transformative properties to create the philosopher's stone, the substance that could transform base metal into gold. And Jung recognized that this wasn't about literal chemistry. It was about psychological transformation. Mercurius represents the trickster energy in the psyche, the force that can't be controlled but must be worked with, the chaos that contains creative potential, if you can learn to engage it without being destroyed by it. The philosopher's stone, Jung understood, isn't found externally. It's created internally, through the process of integrating opposites, bringing together conscious and unconscious, order and chaos, persona and shadow. And the trickster, in the form of Mercurius, is central to this process. It's the force that breaks down rigid structures, that dissolves false unities, that creates the chaos necessary for genuine transformation to occur. But here's what most people miss about alchemical transformation. It's not comfortable, it's not pretty. The alchemical texts describe putrefaction, blackening, dissolution, death of the old form before the new form can emerge. And the trickster presides over this death. It's the psychological mechanism that kills what needs to die, that destroys identifications that have become prisons, that shatters personas that no longer serve development. You're experiencing this when your life falls apart in ways you can't control, when everything you built collapses, when relationships end, when careers dissolve, when the identity you spent decades constructing suddenly feels like a costume you can't wear anymore. The ego interprets this as failure, as catastrophe, as evidence that something has gone terribly wrong. But Jung would recognize it as potential initiation, the trickster creating space for transformation by destroying what was preventing it. The question is whether you can recognize what's happening, whether you can see the destruction as potentially creative rather than purely catastrophic, whether you can work with the chaos rather than just trying to restore order as quickly as possible. Because the trickster doesn't respect your timeline, doesn't care about your plans, operates according to its own logic, which rarely aligns with conscious intentions. Jung observed that the trickster is connected to laughter, not superficial entertainment, but deep laughter that breaks through persona, that reveals the absurdity of taking yourself too seriously, that creates momentary freedom from social constraints. Nietzsche understood this. He wrote about golden laughter, about the importance of being able to laugh at yourself, at your pretensions, at the gap between who you claim to be and who you actually are. This laughter is trickster medicine. It prevents ego inflation, keeps you from identifying too completely with your persona, reminds you that you're playing roles rather than being an essential fixed self. And when you can laugh at yourself, when you can see the comedy in your own seriousness, the trickster's destructive potential diminishes. Because you're already doing what it was trying to force you to do. You're already breaking your own rigid structures before they break you. But most people can't laugh at themselves. They're too invested in their image, too identified with their persona, too afraid of being seen as foolish or flawed. And this rigidity, this inability to play with your own identity, this is what makes the trickster's interventions so devastating. Because when you can't bend, you break. When you can't laugh at your failures, they destroy you. When you can't see the comedy in your own pretensions, the trickster has to use more extreme methods to crack your defenses. Jung documented that cultures need tricksters. Comedians, jesters, people whose function is to mock authority, to point out what everyone sees but no one says, to speak truth by breaking social conventions. The medieval court jester could say things to the king that would get anyone else executed. Because the jester existed outside normal social hierarchy, their role was to introduce chaos, to prevent the culture from becoming too rigid, too serious, too identified with its own mythology. When cultures suppress this function, when they don't allow anyone to mock authority or question fundamental assumptions, rigidity sets in. The system becomes brittle, unable to adapt, unable to see its own blindness. And eventually the suppressed trickster energy erupts in destructive rather than creative ways. In revolution, in collapse, in catastrophic breakdown of the very order that tried to eliminate chaos entirely. You see this in individuals who suppress their trickster energy completely, who never allow themselves to be spontaneous, to make mistakes, to laugh at themselves, to act on impulse. They become rigid, controlled, perfectly appropriate, and then suddenly, inexplicably, they do something completely out of character. Something shocking. Something that reveals everything they've been suppressing. The saint revealed as hypocrite, the perfect person exposed as fraud, the controlled individual having a complete breakdown. This is what Jung meant when he said the trickster is therapeutic. It maintains connection to aspects of consciousness that would otherwise be lost. It keeps reminding you that you're not as in control as you think, not as perfect as you pretend, not as serious as you appear. And these reminders, however uncomfortable, prevent the kind of one-sided development that leads to catastrophic collapse. But the trickster isn't just personal. Jung recognized it as a collective force, an archetypal pattern that operates in cultures, not just individuals. You see this in moments when collective assumptions suddenly shift, when what everyone believed becomes questionable, when established order reveals itself as arbitrary rather than natural, when the line between acceptable and unacceptable moves in ways no one predicted. These collective shifts often feel chaotic, destabilizing, dangerous. And they are dangerous because they're destroying established structures, questioning fundamental assumptions, introducing uncertainty into systems that require certainty to function. But they're also creative, creating space for new possibilities, allowing perspectives that were suppressed to emerge, redistributing power that had become concentrated. The trickster operates at the collective level the same way it operates personally, by disrupting, by boundary crossing, by introducing chaos into rigid order. And Jung observed that individuals who carry strong trickster energy often become scapegoats. They're the ones who say what everyone's thinking but no one will say, who point out that the emperor has no clothes, who refuse to perform the social rituals that everyone else accepts as necessary. And for this they're often punished, rejected, excluded. Because they threaten the collective persona, they reveal the gap between what the culture claims to be and what it actually is. But their function is essential. Without people willing to cross boundaries, to question assumptions, to introduce new perspectives, cultures become stagnant. They stop evolving. They lose capacity for creative adaptation. They become so identified with their own mythology that they can't see when that mythology no longer serves. And eventually, this rigidity leads to collapse. The culture breaks under pressures it couldn't adapt to, because it suppressed the very forces that could have enabled adaptation. You're living in a moment of collective trickster energy. You can feel it. Boundaries that seemed solid are dissolving. Assumptions that felt eternal are being questioned. Structures that appeared permanent are revealing themselves as temporary. And the collective response is largely fear, because chaos is frightening. Uncertainty is destabilizing. Loss of established order feels like loss of meaning itself. But Jung would recognize this moment differently, not as catastrophe, but as potential transformation. The old order isn't working. Everyone can see this even if no one wants to admit it. And the trickster, operating at collective level, is destroying what needs to die so something new can emerge. The question isn't whether to prevent this destruction. That's impossible. The trickster can't be suppressed indefinitely. The question is whether to work with the chaos or just try to resist it until it overwhelms you. At the personal level, this means recognizing where your own rigidity has become prison, where your persona has stopped serving development and started preventing it, where your need for control is actually creating the chaos you're trying to avoid, where your attempts at perfection are setting up the conditions for your own failure. The trickster is already operating in these areas, already undermining your conscious intentions, already introducing the chaos that will eventually force transformation. You can resist this, You can try to suppress the trickster, maintain tighter control, present more perfect persona, work harder to prevent mistakes. And for a while this might work. But Jung documented what happens when suppression continues too long. The shadow accumulates. The pressure builds, and eventually there's an eruption. Sudden, unexpected, devastating. Everything you've been holding together falls apart at once. Or you can work with the trickster. Recognize where it's trying to get your attention. Notice the patterns of self-sabotage. Pay attention to your slips of tongue. Observe where you keep making the same mistakes despite conscious intentions to change. These aren't random failures. They're messages from your unconscious. Indicators that something needs to shift. That your conscious attitude has become too one-sided. That aspects of yourself are demanding recognition. Working with the trickster doesn't mean surrendering to chaos. It means developing conscious relationship to the forces operating below awareness. It means recognizing that your conscious ego isn't the only source of intention in your psyche, that there are other centers, other purposes, other patterns seeking expression. And when you try to suppress these forces, when you operate as if consciousness should have complete control, you create the conditions for the trickster to act autonomously. But when you acknowledge the trickster, when you create space for play, for spontaneity, for boundary crossing, for mistakes, for laughter at yourself, the destructive potential diminishes. Because you're already allowing what it was trying to force. You're already introducing the chaos that prevents rigidity from becoming brittle. You're already breaking your own structures before they break you. Jung observed that the trickster is intimately connected to individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are beneath all social conditioning, beneath all the roles you've learned to play, beneath all the personas you've constructed to gain acceptance. Individuation requires destroying false identities, shattering comfortable illusions, encountering aspects of yourself you've spent a lifetime avoiding. And the trickster is the psychic mechanism that does this destroying. It removes your masks, exposes your pretensions, reveals the gap between who you claim to be and who you actually are, undermines the very structures you thought were protecting you. And this process is painful, humiliating, often experienced as failure. But Jung insisted it's necessary. Because you can't become authentic while hiding behind false personas. Can't integrate your shadow while pretending you have no darkness. Can't develop genuine self-knowledge while maintaining illusions about your own perfection. The trickster forces honesty. Not the kind of honesty where you confess your sins to others, but the kind where you can no longer lie to yourself, where your pretensions become visible to you, where you recognize your own manipulation, your own self-deception, your own participation in patterns you claim to oppose. This self-knowledge is devastating because it destroys the flattering self-image you've maintained. But it's also liberating because you can't transform what you won't acknowledge. And here's what Jung discovered that changes everything about the trickster. It's not just destructive. It's not just the force that tears down your carefully constructed identity. It's also creative. It's the force that allows new possibilities to emerge, that introduces elements you never would have consciously chosen, that creates combinations that couldn't exist through rational planning, that brings together opposites in ways that generate genuine transformation rather than comfortable synthesis. You experience this in moments of genuine breakthrough, when you've been stuck in a problem and suddenly, unexpectedly, the solution appears. Not from hard work, not from logical analysis, but from some sideways approach you never would have deliberately chosen. This is trickster creativity, operating through chaos rather than order, through disruption rather than planning, through accident rather than intention. Artists know this. The best work often comes from mistakes, from accidents, For moments when conscious control failed and something else took over. When the painting went wrong in exactly the right way. When the story took an unexpected turn that revealed possibilities the conscious mind never imagined. When the spontaneous improvisation captured something the rehearsed performance couldn't touch. This is trickster energy, creating through chaos, discovering through mistake, finding truth through deviation from plan. Jung recognized that the trickster represents the union of opposites that's central to psychological wholeness. It's simultaneously creative and destructive, helpful and harmful, wise and foolish, divine and animal. It exists in the paradox, refuses to be reduced to one side of any polarity, and this irreducibility is precisely what makes it transformative. Because transformation happens through holding opposites together, not through choosing one and eliminating the other. Your conscious mind wants simplicity, clear categories, good or bad, right or wrong, success or failure, but reality operates through paradox. Things can be simultaneously true and false, helpful and harmful, growth and destruction. And the trickster embodies this paradox, forces you to recognize it, prevents you from collapsing into comfortable one-sidedness that eliminates ambiguity at the cost of truth. This is uncomfortable. The conscious ego hates paradox, wants clarity, wants to know whether something is good or bad, so it can accept or reject it. But the trickster won't allow this comfort. It keeps introducing ambiguity. Keeps showing you that what seemed purely positive has shadow side, that what seemed purely negative contains creative potential, that you can't divide reality into simple categories without losing essential truth. And learning to hold this paradox, Jung discovered, is essential for psychological maturity. The immature psyche operates in black and white. This is good. That is bad. I am right. You are wrong. But the mature psyche recognizes complexity, sees shades of gray, acknowledges that almost everything contains both light and shadow, that your best qualities have dark sides, that your worst qualities have hidden value, that the trickster isn't your enemy or your friend but something more complex than either category allows. This maturity comes through repeated encounters with the trickster, through having your certainties undermined, your categories disrupted, your simple answers revealed as incomplete. Through learning that the parts of yourself you've been trying to eliminate might be exactly what you need, that the chaos you've been resisting might be creative rather than purely destructive, that the mistakes you've been making might be messages rather than failures. Jung observed that modern consciousness has largely lost connection to trickster energy. We've become too rational, too controlled, too serious, too invested in maintaining perfect personas and eliminating anything that disrupts them. We've created cultures that demand constant productivity, permanent positivity, elimination of spontaneity and play. And this one-sidedness, Jung warned, creates the conditions for catastrophic breakdown, because the trickster can't be permanently suppressed. The more you try to eliminate chaos, the more it accumulates in shadow. The more you try to maintain perfect control, the more pressure builds toward loss of control. The more you invest in rigid structures, the more likely those structures are to shatter catastrophically. And when the eruption comes, when the suppressed trickster energy finally breaks through, it's far more destructive than it would have been if you'd made space for it all along. This is why Jung insisted on the importance of maintaining connection to the trickster. Not by surrendering to chaos, but by creating space for play, for spontaneity, for boundary crossing, for laughter, for mistakes, for the parts of yourself that don't fit your carefully constructed identity. These aren't weaknesses to eliminate. They're necessary aspects of wholeness, sources of creativity, protection against rigidity. connection to energies that conscious ego alone can't access. And this connection is what allows genuine transformation. Not the kind of change where you replace one rigid identity with another, but the kind where you become more fluid, more capable of adaptation, more able to hold paradox, more comfortable with uncertainty, more willing to play with reality rather than trying to control it completely, more able to laugh at yourself, more able to recognize when your own seriousness has become trap rather than virtue. The trickster isn't safe. Jung was clear about this. It's dangerous, disruptive, unpredictable. It will undermine your plans, destroy your illusions, expose your pretensions, introduce chaos into your ordered life, and you can't control when or how it operates, can't predict what it will target, can't prevent it from acting. But you can change your relationship to it, can recognize it as aspect of your own psyche rather than external enemy, can work with its energy rather than just resisting its effects. And this shift in relationship, Jung discovered, is what individuation requires. You can't become whole while at war with parts of yourself. Can't integrate your shadow while pretending the trickster doesn't exist. Can't develop genuine self-knowledge while maintaining the illusion that your conscious ego is the only center of intention in your psyche. The trickster forces recognition that you're not in complete control, that other forces operate below conscious awareness, that chaos isn't just external threat but internal reality. This recognition is humbling. The ego doesn't want to admit its limitations, wants to believe it's in charge, that consciousness has jurisdiction over the entire psyche. But Jung proved this is illusion. The unconscious is larger than consciousness, older than consciousness, more powerful than consciousness. And the trickster is one of its primary manifestations. One of the ways unconscious content breaks through into conscious awareness. One of the forces that prevents consciousness from becoming too one-sided in its development. You're experiencing the trickster right now. In the moments when you sabotage yourself, when you can't stop laughing despite knowing it's inappropriate, when you say what you shouldn't, when your carefully laid plans collapse, when you make the same mistakes repeatedly despite consciously trying to change. These aren't random failures, they're the trickster, operating from your unconscious, introducing chaos into your controlled life. And the question isn't how to eliminate it. You can't. The question is whether you'll recognize it, work with it, allow it to transform you rather than just destroying what you've built. Because the trickster will operate whether you're conscious of it or not. Jung documented this clearly. When it's unconscious, when you don't recognize it as aspect of your own psyche, it's purely destructive. It sabotages autonomously, undermines without purpose you can understand, creates chaos that feels meaningless. But when you become conscious of it, when you recognize its patterns and understand its function, it becomes transformative. The same energy that was destroying becomes creative. The same force that was sabotaging becomes liberating. This transformation doesn't happen through understanding alone. You can read about the trickster, study its mythology, analyze its psychological function. But none of this creates genuine relationship to it. That only comes through experience, through having your persona shattered, your illusions destroyed, your pretensions exposed, through learning to laugh at yourself when you fail, through recognizing the creative potential in your mistakes, through discovering that the chaos you feared might be exactly what you needed. Jung spent his life exploring these territories, not from books, from his own experience, his own confrontation with the unconscious, his own descent into chaos that everyone thought was madness. And what he discovered was that the forces that seemed most dangerous, the energies that threatened to destroy consciousness entirely, these were also the forces that enabled genuine transformation. The trickster included. You're at a threshold, Jung would recognize it. The place where your current identity no longer fits, where your persona feels like prison, where your control creates more problems than it solves, where your seriousness has become burden rather than virtue. And at this threshold, the trickster waits, ready to push you across, to destroy what needs to die, to introduce the chaos that makes transformation possible. You can resist. Try to maintain your current structure. Hold everything together through sheer force of will, and maybe you'll succeed, for a while. But Jung documented what happens when resistance continues too long. When you refuse to cross the threshold the trickster is pushing you toward, the pressure builds, the shadow accumulates. And eventually there's a catastrophic breakthrough. Everything falls apart at once, not gradually, not manageably, but in ways you can't control or contain. Or you can work with the trickster, recognize where it's already operating in your life. Notice the patterns, observe the sabotage, pay attention to what keeps failing despite your efforts. And instead of just trying harder, instead of attempting more control, you can ask what the failure might be trying to tell you, what the chaos might be creating space for, what the destruction might be preparing. This doesn't mean surrendering to every impulse, doesn't mean abandoning all structure, doesn't mean allowing complete chaos. It means recognizing that chaos and order both serve necessary functions. That structure needs disruption, that control needs spontaneity, that seriousness needs laughter, that your persona needs cracks, that your certainties need questioning, that your rigidity needs flexibility, and the trickster provides all of this, whether you want it or not, whether you understand it or not, whether you work with it or against it. Jung's message is simple. You can't eliminate the trickster. It's archetypal, universal, present in every psyche, operating in every life. The only choice is whether to remain unconscious of it, letting it sabotage you autonomously, or become conscious of it, working with its energy toward transformation rather than just experiencing its destruction. This consciousness is what Jung meant by individuation, becoming aware of forces operating below conscious awareness, integrating what was split off, making conscious what was unconscious. And the trickster is central to this process, because it's the force that breaks your false unities, that shatters comfortable identifications, that prevents you from becoming too rigid in any single position, that keeps you fluid enough to continue developing rather than freezing in whatever form happens to be socially rewarded. You're experiencing this whether you recognize it or not. The trickster is operating in you right now, in your mistakes, your failures, your inappropriate laughter, your boundary crossings, your spontaneous impulses, your self-sabotage. And Jung would ask you one question. Are you going to keep fighting it? Or are you going to recognize it as aspect of your own psyche, part of your wholeness, source of creative potential that your conscious ego alone can't access? The answer determines whether the trickster destroys you or transforms you, whether its chaos is meaningless or meaningful, whether your failures are just failures or initiations into something you couldn't have consciously chosen but desperately needed. Jung spent his life proving that transformation is possible, that consciousness can expand, that the forces that seem most dangerous can become most creative, that the trickster, properly understood and consciously engaged, is not your enemy but your ally in becoming who you actually are beneath all the personas, all the illusions, all the pretensions. This is the secret. The trickster operates in you, right now, always, and it will continue operating whether you acknowledge it or not. The only question is whether you'll remain its unconscious victim or become its conscious partner, whether you'll keep being sabotaged by forces you don't understand, or start working with energies that could transform everything you think you know about yourself. Jung documented the path, mapped the territory, proved it's possible, but he can't walk it for you. The trickster is yours, your chaos, your creativity, your destruction, your transformation, and what you do with it determines not just who you become but whether you become at all, whether you remain frozen in whatever persona happens to feel safe, or risk the chaos necessary for genuine development. The trickster waits, at every threshold, ready to push, ready to disrupt, ready to destroy what's false so what's true can emerge. And the choice, Jung would say, is never whether to encounter it. You will. You already are. The choice is whether you'll recognize what's happening, whether you'll work with the energy or just suffer its effects, whether you'll laugh at your own pretensions or wait for the trickster to expose them catastrophically. Stay conscious. That's all. Stay conscious of the force that's trying to make you unconscious. And in that consciousness, find the freedom the trickster has been trying to give you all along. The freedom from false perfection, from rigid control, from personas that have become prisons, from identities that prevent development, from seriousness that's forgotten how to play. This is what the trickster offers. Through chaos, through disruption, through boundary crossing, through laughter, through mistakes, through everything you've been trying to avoid. And Jung proved that what you're avoiding might be exactly what you need, that the force you're fighting might be trying to free you, that the chaos you fear might be the only path to transformation. The trickster operates in you, through you, despite you. And individuation requires recognizing it, not as enemy, not as ally, but as necessary force, archetypal pattern, aspect of wholeness, source of creativity that comes through destruction. And your relationship to this force determines everything about who you become. Jung mapped it. You have to live it. The trickster waits for no one, respects no persona, honors no illusion. And eventually, it will crack whatever you're using to protect yourself from genuine development. The question is whether you'll recognize the cracking as catastrophe or as opportunity, whether you'll resist until you break or work with the breaking toward something new. This is the message, hidden in mythology, preserved in alchemy, documented by Jung. The trickster isn't the problem. Unconsciousness of the trickster is the problem. And consciousness, however uncomfortable, however destabilizing, however threatening to your current identity, consciousness is the path, the only path, the one Jung spent his life illuminating. You're on it now, whether you know it or not. The trickster is operating, and what happens next depends entirely on whether you can recognize it. Not control it, you can't, but recognize it, work with it. Allow it to transform you rather than just destroying what you've built. This is individuation. This is development. This is becoming conscious. And the trickster, paradoxically, is your guide through territory. Your conscious ego would never voluntarily enter but desperately needs to cross. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to breathe and remember that awareness grows when it's shared. Subscribe so you don't lose your way when the next reflection arrives. Leave a like. It helps this message reach others who need to hear it but don't yet know why. And share your thoughts below, because every comment here becomes a spark. One awakened mind helping another remember. Together, we move beyond the dark.